Hello and welcome. Thank you for tuning in for another Karmik Channels broadcast. Today we have in studio Michelle. She's one of our practitioners. She mainly does past lives and soul retrieval. Today our topic is on how to create a sacred space, working from our inner world to our outer world. Welcome, Michelle.
Hi, Jill.
So this is a really good topic. It's something that we've talked about quite a bit with our clients, and there's kind of a few different aspects to it. So would you start us off with the inner world and how we can keep that space sacred?
Okay, starting with your own personal space and your own personal body. Some people that are definitely more empathetic than others need a much bigger space. You absorb so much more from the world around you, whether it's through books or people or even the environment. So the best thing in the world, I would say, is start with centering yourself and grounding yourself. And then have your energy expand from the chakras and go outward and push it so that it goes into the traditional personal space. And then from there, I think knowing that you're going to be walking into different environments are going to require different places of protection or different ideas of protection going from there. So I think first surround yourself with the white light and know that you're grounded and so forth. And then we're going to work from there and go out to meeting people in public and so forth.
Ron and I are, and I know you are too, familiar with this idea that some people's chakras can actually be pulling stuff in rather than pushing out their aura. And so I think people that have this issue with even one chakra are a lot more prone to absorb other people's energy versus having a natural barrier. What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, if the chakra energy itself is reversed, it'll act like a vacuum. And then if you have strong negative emotions that you're working through, that will also attract a lot of things, whether it's from other people or whether it's from other entities or other energies, pulling that in. And that in turn will cause, I'd say, a snowball effect. So if you're feeling sad and you let it keep going forward, then you're going to be attracting people around you that are also sad, possibly even depressed. So your sadness goes into depression and then into a much deeper depression. So you have to be very, very aware of that on how you also affect your environment as well.
Yeah, it's kind of that like universal or quantum mirror. So how does someone keep their chakras cleansed on an ongoing basis? And how do they start that process?
I would think going into a basic meditation every single day would work, where you find yourself a comfy, quiet space. Sit in a chair, which is fine, or if you want to sit cross-legged or whatever's going to be the most comfortable for you. Go through your meditation process of grounding yourself and then pulling the energy back up and going through each chakra and making sure that you're visualizing the energy or even using your hand in a clockwise motion, that it keeps going that way. And then when that one feels open, go to the next one and go to the next one and so on and so forth. And that will go in through your crown chakra eventually and open it up to the spiritual end of it. And I think once you do that, you are starting from a good place because you've cleaned out all the negative and you've put aside all the monkey chatter. So now you can be present in the moment to observe your world and actually take note of it so you can go on to the next steps. And I think after that comes, your basic, are you taking care of your health? Do you exercise? Do you have positive relationships around you? And so forth. So it's all a contributing factor. There's just no one factor, but there's a starting place, and then you have to look outside of that and just kind of go down the line and do kind of a mental checklist on yourself.
That sounds actually very similar to what you said, kind of like one thing at a time.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds very similar to the advice that I would give someone for holistic living when they say, well, how do I become healthier? Which does encompass mind, body, and spirit. And I usually tell them, change just one thing at a time.
Yep.
And do it until it's ingrained in your routine, and then work on the next thing you want to improve and do the same process. And that's just because if people try to make too many changes at once, they just get overwhelmed and they give up.
Oh, absolutely.
And they get disappointed in themselves, and then they just don't ever attempt it again.
Yeah, that's true. One thing at a time. It's like doing any change in a bad habit or something. When you change it, they want you to keep doing it every day for at least 12 to 21 days before it finally sets in and becomes natural. It's kind of like mental muscle memory.
Yeah, exactly. And in a sense, you're kind of rewiring your brain a little bit.
Yeah.
Because you're actually changing, you have to change your the thought patterns, and which in turn changes the brain frequency. So once someone feels that they've started to balance themselves out and they're now keeping themselves more cleansed internally, what do they need to do in their exterior space or their surroundings, whether it's in their home, car, or when they're out in public?
I think starting in your home, you're going to do a basic either Palo Santo or sage cleansing in all of the corners and into every room, and with the intention of that, and possibly light a white candle and go through the rooms as well, starting from top and go into the bottom. And I think this is kind of key, that when you come home after a long day and it's been particularly rough, before you even enter your home, brush yourself off energetically and leave those feelings at the doorstep. You don't want to have them come inside, and then your house becomes like a giant petri dish where all of that chaos and possibly negative energy comes in here, and now it's trapped, and then it just keeps bubbling up. And so it kind of undoes what you need to do to get through the rest of the day.
Yeah, I think there's a lot that can be said as far as like retraining how we go through our daily lives, that a lot of people do tend to come home and they spew it all out either on their partner or their kids, and it comes out in different forms, such as you may not have told them what happened at work, but now you're yelling at them, and you're frustrated that you're yelling at them because you realize that you're not really mad at them. There's something else that's bothering you. So what's kind of a healthy way, do you think, to allow people to vent?
I think definitely coming home and before you walk in the door, definitely clear yourself energetically. Leave it on the doorstep. You can pick it up in the morning when you leave, but don't take it into your home. When you come home, you definitely need to take a few breaths, because now you're in a different environment. You don't want to carry that same energy in. If you need to eat, just decompress. And then if you can talk to your significant other, whoever else you live with, that would be good. And definitely before you go to bed, I recommend an Epsom salt bath, at least about 50 minutes to half an hour before you go to bed. And that does tend to pull out all of the darker negative energies that you've absorbed all day long. And you will sleep much better. So you don't have that monkey chatter running around your head and you're thinking about, oh, I should have said this, I should have done that, whatever. You go immediately to sleep. So your body is not taking that on any more than it needs to.
If people are familiar with the concept of warmer and cooler colored light bulbs,
yep.
Definitely warmer colors are better before bed, because the cooler colors will kind of excite your brain to the point where it's like your brain is like, oh, it's morning time, wake up. So it's a very important pattern of decompression and relaxing so you can sleep soundly. I would just mention that warmer colored bulbs in the home are very important to contribute and add to that effect.
Oh yeah, especially if you've had a string of cloudy days or days where it's been just, torrential downpours of rain. People don't realize that there are people that are severely affected with seasonal affective disorder, but it can also affect the average person just because it's now depressing. And like Seattle has rain all the time, and which is why coffee started out really big over there as far as, certain companies. So I think being aware of that, being aware of the coloring in your house, how many plants do you have? Is there a safe refuge where you can just plain sit, read a book, have a hobby, anything that takes your mind off of it, disengage, in other words.
Yeah, I think slowing down is very important, and cutting out any radio,
electronic devices,
TV, things of that nature, and maybe going to instead, like you said, reading a book, a hard copy book, or, something creative, perhaps, painting or whatever is relaxing to an individual.
Oh, absolutely. Or even having a good conversation with a friend and discussing something else. That way the venting is good. And making sure you are completely getting that out of your system, because if you tend to hold it back, then you're going to stuff it down and try and do retail therapy. You're going to try and do eating to numb yourself from this. So there's many aspects that fall into that.
What would you suggest when people get off of work and now they're getting in their car to drive home?
Your car becomes your own personal space. It is now encased you. So think of it as like a secondary skin or a cocoon. And you should keep that clear. For one thing, do basic maintenance on the car because that's less worry for you, but it also keeps the car in shape so that it becomes a good tool of transportation and safety. I think clearing out any negative energy, keep the space clean and clear. You can set your intention in the car. I've known of several people where the car should have died a long time ago, and they've prayed over the car and they've done Reiki on the car and so forth, and the car works wonderfully. So anything you are driving is a form of energy. In fact, it's the earth because it's metals, nowadays plastics, but it's metals. So you have to respect that and vibrate with it. I had a car one time that my oldest owned, and I got it. And honestly, for about a year, it mourned because I was driving it, not her. Finally, I looked at it and said, that's it. Come on. And finally gave up the ghost. And it said, okay, fine, you're my new driver. And so I ran around with it for a long time. So objects can become attached to you because they are energy. So I think if you treat that car as you would yourself, it becomes that extension of you, and it wants to protect you. It wants to move you from point A to point B. It wants to get you through your life safely.
What's interesting is we often hear someone say like, oh, I'm always having car issues. And it's like, well, of course you are, because you just affirmed that you are.
Yeah, you've done lunch with it, you know. And then be very aware if you're taking a person to the hospital or to work or whatever you're doing, clear their energy out too, because they may look calm, cool, collected, but you don't know what's going on in their, in their mind that they may not be saying. And it could be negative thoughts. It could be turmoil that they're dealing with. It could be, other issues. So I'd say clear it out just for you, because you don't want to take on their energies in the car, nor give that to the car.
Speaking about the car, that reminds me of a home cleansing that we did a while back. Ron and I went on this one, and it was a family that was having issues, they thought, with the house. But it turns out that the spirit that they were dealing with was actually attached to a car that the dad had brought home from an auction. And the boy did not pass away in the car, but this is where he spent his last moments alive. This is what Ron was communicating with him about. He was telling Ron that basically he was dying on the way to the hospital. His mom was driving him to the hospital. And so that was where he was last alive. And that's where his spirit came back to, because it was in that confused state, that fourth dimensional, confused, almost sort of death state. And we did get him the crossover, but what was interesting is the father of the family was saying that this car, once he bought it, he'd fix one thing and a different thing would break. And we hear this from other people sometimes, so we do see a connection with the spiritual realm, where if there's that kind of energy in the car or that spirit attached to the car, and this is why people need to be very careful where they get their vehicles from, just tune into its energy to make sure that it doesn't have an extra guest come with it.
Well, in many cases, psychologically as well as emotionally and physically and energetically, that car does become an extension of you, especially if you're the driver or whatever. So yeah, you should clear that car as well as you would any part of your house. And I would kind of stay away from cars that have had a murder in them, a death, because severe abuse or whatever, because I think that gets more entrenched into the framework of the car. And I know people that have stripped out the car and put in new stuff, but it's still within the energy of the car, so it can go into all of the parts. Like that famous case of the airplane that crashed in Florida, and they reused the parts for other airplanes, and the ghosts of the pilots and the co-pilots wound up showing up on those airplanes even though they haven't been there. So it was that much of an emotional trauma that it set into the parts.
Wow.
And they did not quit until they changed out those parts.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah.
I'm sure that the pilots of the new planes didn't appreciate that too much.
No, neither did the stewardesses or the passengers.
I'm
no.
sure not. Wow.
That's why you must be very careful when buying secondhand things. So a car, definitely secondhand. Clothing, jewelry, anything like that. Be very aware of what it is. Clear it out. If you have to put it in a saltwater bath, if you have to clean it, if you have to push white light through it, whatever it is. I mean, one anecdotal story is one woman inherited jewelry from her aunt. And for the life of her, she could never have a date. It wouldn't work out. And she finally figured out her aunt hated men. So, and every time she was on a date, she wore her aunt's jewelry. So finally she got to the point where she had to clear the jewelry. Then it was fine. But be very, very aware of the energy you're picking up. So you may think something is a really cool vintage coat. You still have to clear it. I would highly recommend it. Or picking up a secondhand piece of furniture. Some of them are fine. Still clear it, just to be on the safe side.
So to round out this topic, let's talk real quick about the workspace and public spaces, and when you're out and about, how do you keep yourself protected?
A lot of psychics have different theories and different methods of that. One of them will personally put around a bubble of white light around themselves, just to kind of have things bounce off. Other people will imagine mirrors in front of them, so whatever is given to you, it bounces back to source. And things like that, I think you have to be intentional of, I'm not going to take this on, I'm just giving it back to source, because I'm not part of the problem, I'm part of the solution, and I'm not taking home their problems, and things like that. So I think the idea of putting yourself either in a golden bubble of the Christ consciousness, or a white bubble, or putting up mirrors and having things just bounce back, and then watching your emotions. Because the minute you give in to extreme emotions, you're opening yourself up, and then you're absorbing what they're throwing at you in one form or another, whether it's verbal, physical, whatever. Make sure your boundaries are safe, secure, and you're coming from a centered place. So I think that works a lot better.
I think that's very good advice. All of us just need to get in the habit of practicing that, because we all could use it.
Yeah, it becomes almost a daily mindfulness that you should do. It should just become habit. And it'll keep you from delving into the negative emotions, and your chances of being affected by your environment becomes a lot lower, and you're in a much peaceful, centered place, so you're not contributing to the outside stuff.
Thank you for joining us again today, Michelle. It's always very insightful to hear your perspective.
Oh, you're welcome.
With this and with any of our other topics, we're always willing to go into more detail. So if you have any questions, please email us at contact@karmikchannels.org and submit your questions to us, and we'll try to answer them on air. Thank you.